Hello and welcome to Push Your Glasses Up. I'm Mikey. Today we're joined by Spencer Perry to talk about many Evil Dead movies. The Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn, Army of Darkness, Evil Dead not in the name, and 2013's Evil Dead. It's gonna be a lot. But hey, real quick, just a reminder, if you enjoy these videos, these podcasts, the trailer reactions, please like them, subscribe to the channel. It helps out a great deal. If you prefer to listen to them without any visuals, then you can do that on podcast services, wherever you find your favorite podcasts, because I like to be everywhere. Let's talk about these Evil Deads. Spencer, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Going on this trend. Less airplanes still in this one. More scary stuff. But we're talking about everything in the lead up to Evil Dead Rise. So we're talking The Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, and 2013's Evil Dead. What is your general history with this here franchise? I think it's probably about the same as mine, honestly.
I feel like it's one of those franchises that, as I started getting more and more into horror movies, you just kept hearing about it, on those A&E, the 100 Scariest Movies, kind of those sort of countdown shows. And I wish I could remember when I first saw them, but it also doesn't help that, Ash as a character in Army of Darkness is sort of lampooned by Duke Nukem, so you hear those sort of lines from Duke Nukem before you know Ash from Army of Darkness.
At least our generation. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. For some people, yeah. So yeah, it's always just sort of been there.
Yeah, it's that Simpsons aspect of the osmosis of the pop culture surrounding this franchise was always there, even if we hadn't seen it yet. Then maybe I saw some of these a little bit before you did, because
Probably.
I had older siblings, and my sister, who is the oldest, when she was in high school, I was in late elementary school, and her friends would come over, and so I saw a couple of these and Pumpkinhead and stuff when I was 8. I don't know. But yeah, it's an interesting thing because I almost associate Bruce Campbell more with the Saturday afternoon TV show stuff, because Briscoe County and what was it?
Jack of all trades.
Yeah. That's the kind of stuff I was seeing more with him. And so for Evil Dead, when I was a kid and finally saw it when my sister's friends were over, I was like, I know that guy. So it's just kind of a strange relationship I have with it. And then obviously growing into being a Sam Raimi fan, really came with, obviously for me, Spider-Man. And then I learned that I had already seen some of his movies by finding out who the director of Spider-Man was. So
right. Yeah.
Back in the day when certain websites that we don't necessarily focus on as much anymore, that were more pervasive, we're covering stuff I was in the library at school looking up, there's news on the Spider-Man movie, who's the Sam Raimi guy, and that's basically how I was figuring it out. But yeah, I just it's such a strange hodgepodge of a franchise that is so all over the place. That
I think its cultural footprint is also defined by the fact that the first two movies have been released on every home video format at least 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
So no matter what video store like Suncoast, FYE, Blockbuster, you were gonna find Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 in there in probably 3 or 4 different shapes.
And I wonder if that's especially the first movie, because of who the rights holders were, and eventually that getting picked up by another company, and then they probably just umbrella licensed it to so many different people that were okay, you get this one special feature, you get this one special feature. Because I do remember, like, the first time that I really was like, oh no, I need that one, was like the Anchor Bay, like that really nice one with the blue poster as the cover art, was like, yeah, that's the one I gotta get. It was like the hard book binding one. And then for Evil Dead 2, I had it may still be in a closet somewhere. I think I got rid of it though. That like looks like the Necronomicon. And it has like the foam inside of it, and it over time just like deteriorated like terrible. Like if you press anyone who owns that, it like did the scream on it.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know that anyone who owns that has a different story about its current condition.
Oh yeah, it's like it's the worst. It's like that the picture of the deteriorating Ninja Turtle suit from back in the 90s. It just looks like that. It's a outstanding work. But yeah, I don't know. It's just such an interesting franchise because it's like, in a way, they sometimes remake stuff. In a way, they're not remakes. They're like, so like Evil Dead 2 is a continuation of the first movie's story.
Right.
But because they do this recap, because they didn't have the rights to their own movie, it caused this confusion of like, well, it's just a remake, but it's different. And it's like, no, it is just a sequel. It's just got the fatal flaw of actually, they shouldn't have done that. Evil Dead 2 is my favorite of the batch.
Same.
That's the one fatal flaw with that movie to me, is that it is confusing at the top of it, where it's like it just doesn't feel like a continuation because of that. But yeah, when you do the splice off and you cut that off and you just do the part where Ash is flying through the air, that matches up perfectly, and then you're just going forward from there. So it's just a bizarre, cobbled together as they went kind of franchise, and it's just a fascinating thing because of that, I think.
I was thinking about this last night, where I was like, it would be interesting to do the experiment of splicing them together in that way, where I think there's perfect moments, obviously from Evil Dead 1 to Evil Dead 2, where you just cut out the first like 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes of Evil Dead 2, so that, you know, the camera, you know, rushing into Ash in Evil Dead 1 leads into him flying through the air at the start of Evil Dead 2. And I think you can lop off the first 2 or 3 minutes of Army of Darkness and then just have all three of them play.
Well, that's the thing too, is because Army of Darkness like changes what the end of Evil Dead 2 did. So like it has that same problem of like, you can just make a 5-hour movie out of this. You just need to you need to cut off about this much on 2 and 3 and you can make it work. It's so strange. And like the way that they handle tone, I think Evil Dead 2 is where they found the balance, and it worked perfectly. They managed to do that Lovecraftian like guy losing his mind kind of movie, and made it work in a way that was like, because it's such over the top comedy, especially for that era, like the way that people losing their minds would have been handled. I think that it just works in a way that the humor balances with the horror the best. Because the first movie is just that's just a straight horror movie, teens in a cabin, like the classic setup. It has the obvious like lore implications that continue on, but it's the way that it's handled is a little on the grotesque side for some things. Stuff that was redone for the 2013 movie that I think they could have probably like, you didn't have to go that far again with like the woods scene specifically. I don't think they have to go that far with that. We understand. But yeah, it's where they go with 2 finds that perfect balance between like taking things too seriously and then going so hard into the Looney Tunes style. Like it's the way that I think of Army of Darkness is a Looney Tunes take on the Brothers Grimm, as opposed to the Lovecraftian kind of guy losing his mind in the woods kind of story. And it's that's where I just sit in my like sweet spot for the franchise. So yeah.
I agree, because, you know, I went yesterday straight from Evil Dead 2 into Army of Darkness, and I've always I don't dislike Army of Darkness, but it is my least favorite of the movies because it goes so hard on the slapstick cartoon tone in some places, to the point where there are like entire scenes of it where I'm like, this doesn't work for me at all. Like the little Ashes running around terrorizing him in the windmill doesn't work for me in the slightest.
I like it in the sort of Don Quixote kind of way.
Sure.
But like I also agree. Like if you're watching them back to back, they're just, that kind of stuff doesn't fly quite the same, because there's something like almost like college play about, not even the first one, but the second one, where like Bruce is doing the pantomime stuff with the like his hand being taken over, and it's like that stuff is so good and it's funny, but like not crazily cartoon funny. It doesn't,
it's so funny and grotesque at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And so they do, like, honestly, like Army of Darkness is rated R, but like it feels like a PG-13 kind of movie versus Evil Dead. Like I would say Evil Dead 2, like most of it isn't even as graphic as the first one, which is kind of bonkers, because like Evil Dead 2 was released through a shell company so that they could avoid getting an NC-17 on. And it's like, it's less than the first one. It's so strange.
Well, and to your point about seeing it when you were 8 years old, I think that like a smart 8, 9, 10-year-old could watch Evil Dead and like it by understanding that it has a very cartoonish tone. And it's not like a lot of the violence in the movie is you know, on the level of the Fede Álvarez movie, where it is like grim and gritty and gross, and you know, and there's a hint of realism. In Evil Dead 2, it's like they're just shooting a fire hose that's spraying red water.
It's Tarantino. It's like that kind of violence where it's just like, yeah, Kill Bill is super graphic violent, but like nobody sprays blood like that. Like we understand that.
But then also I want to circle back to in Army of Darkness. The funny thing about going straight from Evil Dead 2 into Army of Darkness is that suddenly Ash has like that bigger than life personality, and the Deadites no longer have
Nukem in that movie specifically.
But it's funny how he has the personality and the Deadites kind of lose their personality, because in the first two movies it's all about, you know, the torment that that's sort of their biggest weapon, in addition to, you know, the bodily harm is the way that they can torment you, and that's almost not present in Army of Darkness at all, except for the Little Ashes and Evil Ash. But
particularly
the skeletons
Evil
are cartoon characters.
It's like Jason and the Argonauts. It's so
they have, you know, like little skeleton drum sets that they're using to march into battle, and which is funny. But it's funny. That's just not my favorite thing about Evil Dead.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is like if you lop it apart from the other stuff, like it is a super enjoyable, fun time. It's just standing in the shadow of something that is clearly like it's following up a sophomore effort that didn't suffer the sophomore slump, is essentially. But yeah, like the fact that like I want to keep going back to like the changes they do with the intros and stuff, because like it's confusing in the first one to the second one, because like obviously they wanted to save money, and so they didn't set up a whole cast to film like these redo things, whatever. They just did Linda. Okay, that's fine. I get that. But that's where the confusion comes from. Why does Army of Darkness completely... It literally ends Evil Dead 2 with them bowing to Ash, and it starts Army of Darkness with him in shackles as a slave. How did that change come about? It's so bizarre to me. And it's like...
Can I offer a guess?
Sure.
which is that Dino De Laurentiis obviously was the producer for Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, and
He has his ideas.
He has his ideas, and at the time, after, I might be getting the years wrong, but between Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness is around the time that Schwarzenegger really pops off as a movie star, and Conan obviously is like a big one. And I know if you look at the international poster for Army of Darkness, it's the one that has Bruce with the muscles to where he looks like Arnold.
Yeah.
And Bruce had said before that was all Dino.
The Frazetta style. Yeah.
Yes, we need to sell this in Europe by making it look like Schwarzenegger's in the movie. I wonder if that was sort of the Conan influence.
That is completely valid. I think that totally makes sense. Still, weird decision.
Yeah,
because you could still do that weird marketing stuff and at least have those two stories align. It's like, I guess they. So this is something that like popped up in my head while I was watching Army of Darkness again that I never noticed, and it's that a lot of this movie is the Two Towers.
Yeah.
Like a lot of this movie is the Two Towers. So they needed to set up Henry somehow. And like him coming to like we needed Rohan to come in, and like so they needed that look to the east in the morning and they'll show up kind of moment. But then like they like there's like frame for frame shots that look like Peter Jackson was like, oh no, yeah, we're just using this shot in Lord of the Rings. A lot of
that's not that far-fetched of an idea.
No, because of his history with the low budget horror stuff. Like obviously that completely makes sense. It's just so funny to like. I think the last time I watched Army of Darkness was probably when Lord of the Rings was in theaters, so it's been a long time. But it's just it's bizarre with nowadays when I'm watching Lord of the Rings like once or twice a year, because that's who I am, to see these side by sides of like certain shots of the skeleton army line up with the orc army perfectly. Certain plot aspects line up, like Henry coming back to help at the end. The one that really kicked this off, like I kind of started noticing it before this, but the one that I like really hit me was the moment with the black powder near an open flame, where it's literally the same shot as Wormtongue and Saruman, like over the big bomb before Helm's Deep. It's the same exact shot. The only difference is one of them is holding a flame to black powder and one of them is holding black powder to the flame. Like it's so strange that like, and I don't even mean like it looks similar. Like they're grabbing at the wrist of the other person the exact same way. It is so strange to like catch on to this so far in the future compared to when like I feel like people should have been talking more about this like over the last 20 years, and I've never seen anyone mention this before.
The other funny thing about Army of Darkness influence beyond itself, as we've just seen with Lord of the Rings, is I haven't seen the movie since it came out, but the Sam Raimi directed Oz the Great and Powerful is basically Army of Darkness for children.
I have never seen that movie, and that's honestly the biggest sell I've ever heard for it.
I mean, I don't know that it holds up at all. I don't really remember anything about it, but I do remember
I don't think by everything I've heard, it held up when it came out. So
that's true. Yeah. But I mean, it's about a guy who ends up in a place that he doesn't understand, and then it culminates in like a big castle fight where he helps everyone defend against, the winged monkeys and what have you. But it really is.
It's just reskinned, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the PG, children's version of Army of Darkness.
That's so bizarre. I still probably won't ever see that movie, but I'm a little more inclined now, at least with that.
Just look up the clips on YouTube.
Yeah, that's probably a better bet. Let's move on to, we'll clearly still be because we'll be comparing and contrasting. But let's move on to 2013, because this is a very strange movie for me, because I think this is a good horror movie of its era. It clearly has like that early 2010s vibe, the post-Hostel kind of grimy kind of look to everything. But I think this is actually a great Blair Witch movie and not the best Evil Dead movie, because they shift into more of that witchcraft side of things. And you know, it's fine. It works. It's still a good movie. It's just rewatching it, other than the gags being nods to gags from the original movies, it just doesn't like feel like an Evil Dead movie to me, which is it's peculiar.
Do you think that's because of there's not, you know, Mia is sort of the pseudo Ash in the sense that she is the lead character, but she's
sort of Ash and like Cheryl mixed together almost.
Right, but even her personality is not Ash's personality.
Oh, and that doesn't really that's certainly bug me.
What makes its tone feel different from other Evil Deads. But I also feel like if you're going to remake Evil Dead, you can't have someone come in and do a Bruce impression. Like you've got to try something different.
For sure. I think for what she's given, I think Jane Levy, I don't remember, however it's pronounced. I think she did a great job. She's clearly like the standout performance in this movie, especially compared to David, the most bland person on the face of the planet. But no, I think that there's just like, it stripped so much of the comedy away and went back to that original movie so hard and tried to make it like modern for the time that it lost some of the touchstone feeling, which, you know, that'll happen. Again, it still came out to be a good horror movie of that era, probably one of the better remakes of that era in particular, along with like, I think Texas Chainsaw is pretty solid, right? Like,
well, that was even 10 years before Evil Dead. So like, you know, the Evil Dead remake, that's really post a lot of the big, you know, tentpole flagship horror remake that got made. But you're right, it does still have that sort of, you know, Hostel French Extreme tone and
yellow and green color correction on it with just like dirt everywhere. That's how.
And we're gonna have people that you know, or get possessed and then just start swearing at the camera for the opening. Like, that's my least favorite thing, is that opening scene. I really don't think you need that opening scene in the slightest.
No. I like, and again, I think that it's of this era is just like, why did Mia have to be a drug addict? Like, I get that you felt you needed to find a modern plot device to get them to the cabin, but it's just like, you can just have friends go to the cabin. We would have been fine with that. It felt
works
like
in the other ones.
Yeah, exactly. And it just feels like a little bit of a gratuitous, like, oh, she's troubled, so we'll make her the victim kind of. And it's like, that feels more overplayed to me than just having a group of kids go to the cabin. Because like, there at one point you turn from a stalwart plot device into a cliche, and like the drug storyline feels cliche to me, where like every horror movie should and can have kids going to a cabin. That's just what we're supposed to have that. So yeah, it's just so like, it's a hard thing to describe, where I'm just like, yeah, this should have been the Blair Witch remake movie, right? Like, that's how I feel that this should have come out, because there's just so much more bang for your buck on the witchcraft side, as opposed to like the evil entity that makes people lose their minds kind of side of things. So,
right.
Yeah.
And they do that a little bit in the remake. You know, there's obviously some possession stuff, but And
but it's like it's more that it was called upon them,
right,
as opposed to just like being a thing that's out there.
Right.
Yeah.
And but even then, Mia ends up being the character that's like the big possessed character. And then also becomes the hero and sort of like a mirror to Ash, because that happens to him in Evil Dead 2.
Yeah.
But I think that is a little bit where the humor is present and might get lost on the audience, because the rest of the tone is so like overtly, look how grim and gritty this is. Because when the guy has to rip open a trash bag and cut barbed wire to get to the book, like, that is funny.
Yeah.
That he's going to those lengths to read.
And he's still doing it. Like, yeah, it's not like, you know what? I'm good.
Because that's obviously a moment where people in the audience are going to be like, why is he doing this? And it's like, well, it's funny that he's doing that. It's a little funny. And then when the lady cuts her arm off with the carving knife and is like, I fixed it, and then it flops onto the ground. Yeah. That's pretty funny too. But the rest, everything else surrounding it is so of a different tone that the jokes get buried.
Yeah, it's mostly like the literal joke line delivery, like the visual gags. I am with you on those. The joke line delivery, I think, misses until the finale when Mia is pulling a little bit more of that Ash personality through, and it's not like full on one-liners, but like it's more in line with that. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, I'm struggling to think of the exact kind of example, but like saving the thing for the end of the movie, where it's like that will work most times. I think they needed to go earlier. I think they needed to get a little bit more like confrontational with the audience in that way, as opposed to just the gore, because like that's all great. Like the effects of this movie being like 90% practical too is just like phenomenal. Like they all look amazing, but like it's just that little bit of tone structure that I think is missing from it, which like when you hit your stride in the original movies with Evil Dead 2, where you found that perfect balance, like it needs to be a little stronger in this one, which like from everything I've seen with the trailers for Rise seems like it has more of that in it, but also still keeps the like immensely grotesque stuff.
Yeah. That's why I'm excited to see the new one, is that it seems to not only have a sense of humor that is present throughout, but it's also doing the gore that we want to see, and it's also making the Deadites,
a little goofy again.
Tormentors. Yeah. That they're in it. To them, it's funny to make you squirm and to make their victims feel bad and lose hope. And that's such a big part of their personality that has kind of been missing.
Yeah.
It was totally absent in Army of Darkness, and there's a little bit of it in 2013, but not a lot.
Yeah, they're still just like vessels to kill somebody.
Yeah.
So,
But the Evil Dead Rise, the Deadites really seem like Evil Dead 2 Deadites, just with brand new, modern makeup.
Yeah. Which is like
even grosser.
That is where we needed the course correction. Like the gore itself works phenomenally in 2013, but that one course correction of like I guess to like whittle it down to its core, it's like it's just that little bit of personality. That's like it just needs, and not Ash personality, just like the franchise personality. Because like that sort of humor stuff was in there in the very original one, but Ash wasn't Ash yet. Like to counter it on the good guy side. So it's like I'm super pumped to see where Rise ends up, especially with how many people have been coming out of it saying like, yeah, it works for the way you want it to work. Because I would just, I will never expect an Evil Dead movie to ever live up to Evil Dead 2 to me.
Right.
But if it can come in second, I'd be pretty happy. Like, I'd be super satisfied to see something knock up on the list to about there. Because I can revisit 2 a lot, and on a Saturday afternoon I can revisit Army of Darkness, unrelated to Evil Dead, the way we were discussing. But it's just one of those things where I'm like, man, I would love another Evil Dead where I'm like, yeah, I want to watch this back to back with 2, because it's that is something that's been missing over the years when I do revisit any of these movies. So other than this past week when I just mainlined all 4 of them.
Well, the thing that really struck me with this rewatch of The Evil Dead was that, unlike so many other horror movies of the 70s and 80s that were, we have a camera and all my friends and we're going to go into the woods and make a movie, is that Sam knows where to put the camera.
Yeah.
In the first Evil Dead, and he knows how to make the image look cinematic, even if they don't have money and they're just filming on 16 millimeter, as opposed to.
Well, yeah, he has that knowledge from like pulp comics to like know what something's supposed to look like.
Yeah, and that's the thing that really separates Evil Dead from everything else in that era, and it's sort of why clearly it became a blueprint of Cabin in the Woods movies.
Yeah.
Is because he knew how to make it look good and where to put the camera, and it didn't matter that the script isn't like amazing. It's kind of just exists. But as long as an Evil Dead movie knows where to put the camera, even if you're changing settings from the cabin to a high rise, which is an interesting twist, but it also on paper could be the kind of thing that like a suit could just be like, oh, why don't we just put it in the city this time?
It could be the thing that breaks it because somebody came up with in a boardroom. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it seems like they've nailed it. And part of that is like, just know where to put the camera.
Yep.
Just know how to make this not look like a horror movie that's shot in the city with your friends, just
Everything
because
else.
you have friends and a camera.
And thank goodness that they held off long enough that like it didn't go into the found footage aspect.
Right. Yeah.
Granted, 2013 was kind of like a little bit near the end of that anyway, so they probably missed it regardless. But yeah, it's I would have been not happy with that.
There was such a long gap between Army of Darkness and Evil Dead that they could probably do a book of every version of Army of Darkness 2, Evil Dead 3, Evil Dead 4, Evil Dead Remake that was considered and talked about and even developed. And I would be curious to know how many of them were on those trends that were happening in those eras.
Because that's the thing, is like 2013 is so of its time visually that like you have to assume every version was fitting the era it was in exactly because of that. So it's that's such a weird thing to think about as far as like the production side goes, just because it is like it's the progenitor kind of, but like then with it they want to not necessarily with Rise, but like every time they've wanted to restart it, it does seem like they want to capitalize on what's popular now, so they want to theme it to what's popular now. So like I'm sure it would have felt like The Conjuring 6 years ago.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's funny to think about it in relation to another franchise not necessarily in terms of tone and imagery, but in terms of the amount of movies and how often they make sequels, which is the Predator series.
Yeah.
So like, they make 1 and 2 really fast, and then it takes a while to make a third one. And then, in a way, Shane Black's The Predator is sort of that, how can we reboot this franchise for this era in the same way that Evil Dead was, how can we reboot this franchise for this era? And Evil Dead works, and The Predator does not, because they get so much of it. They're trying to do too much. And I think
they're trying to capture what's popular in movies in 2018, and that's Marvel. That's essentially what they tried to do with The Predator. And, you know, Shane Black has some experience with that with Iron Man 3, which I stand behind. But yeah, it didn't necessarily work the same way.
Right.
But yeah, cool. I think we could probably cap it there. We don't need to go into like Dino's entire filmography about this, but
no.
That would surely. So
is your ranking 2 Evil Dead, Army of Darkness, Evil Dead?
It's this is such a strange thing to think about because like I said, I love Army of Darkness, but in a way that is separate. So it's like,
sure.
I feel like I could flip flop on 2013 and Army of Darkness at any time. So those are sort of tied in the back. But yeah, it would be 2, 1, and then however those work out depending on the day. What about you?
For me, it's 2, then Evil Dead 2013, then The Evil Dead, then Army of Darkness. And I sort of feel the same way where like The Evil Dead and Evil Dead maybe could swap depending on how I'm feeling, because that first movie is so strong. But I also have like a real fondness for the 2013 movie, in part because it's a great watch. It's fun to see with a crowd, but also like the fact that it just works. Yeah. They made an Evil Dead remake and it's good is enough of like, you know, to put it in high regard for me.
Yeah. And it's also like, I think a lot of it is nostalgia factor for me, because I was 29 when 2013 came out. And it's like, at that point, I can just be like, yeah, that was a good time, but it doesn't have that little special thing for me.
Sure,
so like, I think that's where I probably unfairly knock it, just because it is that like, I have that, you know, I'm going to be 40 in 2 years. I have a long connection to this franchise now. So it's like, I think that it's always going to be unfairly pitted against the new editions of it. Like Rise is going to go through the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I do have higher expectations than I had for 2013 going into 2013. Because in that era, it is just like, you know, the Friday the 13th remake, the Nightmare on Elm Street remake.
Yeah,
and it's
right.
like, you have this expectation of them not being very good. So like it was still it was surprising to me the way that it worked out, whereas Rise I do have a little more expectation just because people I trust have said ahead of time, because this was shown pretty far in advance for people. Like almost 2 months ahead on this one when reviews dropped. So it is one of those things where I'm like, I could be disappointed in a way, because I'm letting that get to me, as opposed to, you know, just going into it with lowered expectations and being like, yeah, it's fine. Awesome. Well, we're going to be back with Evil Dead Rise soon. The next week or so, whenever we get around to seeing it and scheduling when we can talk again. But yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for coming back on, Spencer. As always,
always happy to talk horror movies.
You're one of my go-to reliable sources for like either a franchise or a genre, and I appreciate it a great deal because it makes my job very easy here. So until next time, bye.